Hi, my name's Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt in session. Today I'll be speaking with Dr. Hayley Quinn, who's a clinical psychologist, supervisor and trainer based at the Compassionate Wellbeing Centre in Brisbane, Australia. She has extensive training in CFT and has presented trainings herself in Australia and overseas. She's a strong believer in supporting practitioners to incorporate compassion into their own lives as well as their work, to care for both their clients and themselves and maintain a sustainable practice. She's filled with warmth and loveliness, and so I do hope you enjoy being in session with my friend Dr. Hayley Quinn. Yes, well, welcome, Dr. Hayley Quinn, to Compassion in a T-shirt in session, and actually delighted to have a fellow Brisbaneite in session. Although actually, you were just telling me you're not in Brisbane today; you're actually up the coast. So, where are you located right at the moment?
So I'm up on the Sunshine Coast, which is a beautiful part of Australia, as you know.
Yes.
Normally based in Brisbane, but also have the privilege of being based here as well.
Yeah. So I'm really keen to have a bit of a chat, because although we've now known each other quite a long time, we sort of haven't fully got to do that, where we really sit down and have a longer chat. We've actually presented together a couple of times and been to conferences, and there's a lot of really good touch points there along the way. But so yeah, this will be great. And I guess, I wondered if we could start just sort of telling us a little bit about yourself, your life maybe, but also your work and what's kind of really inspiring you at the moment, or whatever you'd like to mention there.
Lovely. So first of all, thanks for having me on here. This is really cool. So I, as you can probably tell, didn't grow up here. I was born in England and had somewhat of a tricky start, I guess, to my earlier life. And at 25, decided to come out to Australia. And without sounding too cliched, really kind of wanted to kind of come out and find myself. And I came out here, and I'd kind of always known that I wanted to work in a helping profession, but I had not done well at school. I left school early and didn't get good results. And that had kind of led me to this really quite solid belief that I was quite stupid. So I struggled to know whether I could pursue doing further studying. So I can remember making a phone call to Lifeline and speaking to a man called Andrew and saying to him that I knew that I wanted to be a psychologist, but I didn't really know how to do that. And what did he recommend? And he had recommended that I do the volunteer work at Lifeline and also get as much experience as I could and go and do a bachelor degree. So I did the volunteer work at Lifeline, and I also worked for a national children's counselling line as well, and then started a bachelor, and then found myself managing some illness and stopped doing that, and then had a bit more of a windy road and found myself raising my child on my own, and decided at that point that I didn't really just want to get into work that I didn't enjoy, because I'd done that for most of my life. And I really wanted to go back and give studying another go, which was a kind of a big thing, because obviously I was a solo parent at the time. And I was out here living in Australia without support. So I did that. I set a special entrance exam at, oh no, that was earlier. That was for the first time I studied. I went back and did a special entrance exam, which was very daunting, actually. This time I applied for the Bachelor of Psychology and ended up doing my Bachelor of Psychology, went on to do honours, and then had people saying to me, "Oh, are you going to do postgrad?" And I was like, "What, me? I was a school dropout. How could I do that?" And ended up doing a clinical PhD, which I think I was perhaps surprised about more than anybody. So whilst I was at uni, I think it was in about 2008, I came across Christopher Germer's The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion book and read that. And it just really resonated with me that maybe there was something that I'd been missing in how I was treating myself. I had grown up with an extremely harsh self-critic. I was very self-doubting. And then in 2013, I went to a conference in Sydney and I saw Paul Gilbert and Dennis Tersch presenting on the introduction to compassion-focused therapy. And that really resonated with me. And I just really found them to be great presenters and really quite funny and engaging. So I thought, oh yeah, this feels like a nice fit. And that kind of got me involved in the compassion side. Now, I had been ACT trained prior to that, and I'd done a lot of different workshops with people, including Kelly Wilson. And listening to Kelly present and watching Kelly as a human being, and I think anybody that's been to a Kelly Wilson workshop knows, take your tissues and you're probably going to go to deep places. And that's really what happened for me. And I think there was a big part of him inspiring me to actually be okay with who I am and what I've been through and where I've come from and the struggles and challenges I've had as a human being. And then adding compassion to that was kind of like the icing on the cake. It's like, okay, this is how I can really kind of bring these practices into my life and be able to do that. So that led to me having opportunities to present with yourself. We did that presentation at Griffith, which was my uni, so that was really lovely. And then I went to the Compassionate Minds Summit and Retreat in New York, the first year it was on. And then I went back the second year and actually was a presenter there, which was, again, my younger self was kind of a bit mind blown. And then also had an opportunity to go and present a 3-day training over in Singapore. So I've had some really wonderful opportunities that have come that have been humbling and surprising. So that's kind of where I got to with my sort of, my training and my learning, which of course is ongoing. Mm. And I've been working in private practice, a couple of different places. I joined a group practice when I first started out, and then I moved to another place where I was working for myself, but within a group practice. And I got really quite sick and had to leave there and move my practice closer to home. So I ended up setting up on my own up in Brisbane. And just ran a small private practice, working a few days a week. Thankfully, my health improved over time. And last year, during COVID, opened up the Compassionate Wellbeing Centre so that I could actually have colleagues work with me as well, because I realised how isolating it was just being in solo private practice. But then recently, I actually have closed my books to clients, which has been quite strange because obviously client work's what I've done the whole time I've been a psychologist. And I'm working more and more with other therapists and helping professionals because I've really noticed over the years the difficulties with self-care for helping professionals, the narrative that plays out in the professions, and I guess the difficulties that show up. So this has become a real passion area for me. One, because I had to really kind of put that in place for myself with my own health. I think often a lot of the things we end up doing are because of something that's happened for ourselves. But also just the things I heard when I was at workshops, talking to other people, conversations I had with colleagues. So this is kind of my new venture, and I'm loving it actually.
Wow, thank you, Hayley, for that just very moving kind of summary of how things have transpired. I definitely want to tap into all that you're doing and thinking about self-care for clinicians as well. But yeah, in a way, a sort of a journey of overcoming barriers, sort of thing. You know, especially to begin with, just the external barriers. You know, things that would happen around you or to you, in a sense. You know, from whether it be sort of, you just alluded a little bit to sort of even early in life, but you know, as time went on as well, these kind of external barriers. But as Paul Gilbert sort of talks about, it's that thing that we do, isn't it, where we take the external and we bring it internal. And so, you know, then we have these other little kind of thoughts and ideas and sort of the critical self-talk and so on that just persists, sort of thing, you know, often despite the external changing. And yet there it is, just niggling away the way that our thoughts go.
Yeah, I had certainly had a very harsh self-critic growing up, and a lot in my adult life as well, until I started making changes around that and understanding, and certainly compassion-focused therapy and my learning and subsequent teaching to others of that has really helped me with that. It's not to say I don't have any self-criticism, but it's like so vastly different for me. It's absolutely not a default anymore. In fact, I would say it's more my hand on heart, how are you going, darling? That's my default now.
Yeah.
So that had been, well, literally life-changing. You know, I don't say that lightly.
No.
Literally life-changing, because it has allowed me to, what I like to think of as, step out of the shadows. I think when your self-criticism is so harsh, it can be a very, very dark place. And self-compassion and all the flows of compassion for me have really helped me step out of that darkness, I think.
Yes.
I remember saying to myself quite a long time ago that if I could give myself a gift, it would be to see myself through the eyes of somebody who truly cared for me. And I try and remember that and bring that to my life. And you know, with my work with clients and with supervisees as well, that's a gift I like to give to them, so that they could see themselves through the eyes of somebody that truly cares for them.
There's really been seismic shift for you, hasn't there, with that? It's so impressive to hear about that, because we all really do, you know, in one way, shape or form, struggle with that sort of stuff. And I you know, there's this little thing that, you know, even now, when you have a success, like there you are presenting at the Compassion Summit, it sort of surprises you still. You know, there's this little very humbling feeling that you're kind of like, oh my goodness, I almost can't believe it. But the harshness, the attack, you know, that bit of it has absolutely softened, and you know, it's such a, like you say, a kind of gift. And was it stepping out of the darkness, or
stepping out of the shadow, stepping out of the darkness,
out of the shadows, and of course, that really harsh self-attacking, self-hating, self-criticism is really related to shame too, isn't it? Which is a lot about hiding in the shadows. But it's funny, because when I think about it, there was also something in you, even, you know, as a young person, that, I don't know, believed in yourself, or knew what was really helpful for you, or was willing to take certain steps. I mean, even just your move here, but even some of those early decisions to do some study and so on. I mean, what are your thoughts there? That what was, there was something already there, I think, maybe.
Yeah, I think a couple of things come up, actually. I'm having a bit of a giggle to myself. A couple of things was, I don't know if there's any wisdom. I think I was just bouncing around and kind of checking out what happened. But I think you're right. I think there was a part of me that had courage.
Yes.
That propelled me forward. I don't know I was that conscious of it. I don't know that I was that aware of it. But she was there. And a part of me that knew that staying where I was in the life I was living was not right for me. And whilst Australia is not the place I was born, it has always felt like the place I've come home to, which might seem a bit strange, but I really felt like, and maybe that for me was because nobody knew me here and I could actually be me in the way I wanted to be me, rather than trying to be the version of what I thought people needed or wanted me to be. So I feel very fortunate to be living here.
Yes, there was absolutely embedded in you the kind of the strength and courage piece, but also a kind of an openness, a sort of a willingness almost to do the bouncing around, because that takes sort of something to just sort of open oneself up to the bounce. And then there was always this aspiration or sort of I want things to be better or to be different, and so it's almost like once you heard from Chris Germer and Paul Gilbert and Dennis Turch and of course Kelly Wilson, that started to bring those elements of yourself into focus more and gave it a kind of an idea of what is this thing, and sort of making it conscious and maybe more intentional maybe, or those sorts of things. But it's just interesting how those qualities really were there all the way along.
Yeah, and I think the way that both Kelly's work and other people in the ACT community and Paul's work and other people in the CFT community, I think the way that that work was presented, the way that the trainings that I was attending were run, really created a sense of safeness for me to kind of take a deep dive inside of myself and look at the things that I did and didn't like, the qualities that I had, the struggles that I had. So I think that had been really important. I always sort of wonder, had I gone a different path with different training, would I have had the depth of change that I have had in the work that I've done? I mean, who knows? We don't know, do we? You only know the path you took, hey?
Yes, and I get a little bit of a sense that just you yourself are kind of hungry for this sort of change and this sort of growth. So had you been an accountant or a sort of a flight attendant or whatever, you might very well have still kind of achieved this stuff. But actually, yes, that's an interesting point that sort of earlier on, it was the strength and courage to really work with the external. And then along with some of this later training, it became that sense of safeness to approach the internal. And so it was sort of maybe a little bit along those lines.
Yeah, I think it might seem strange to say it's probably my favorite part of the work, because it's certainly not the easiest part of the work. Is working with the dark side.
Yes.
Working with our dark side, working with shame, working with self-criticism. That for me has been my favorite part of the work for myself, and the favorite part of work with clients, because I think that's where we see the most change and the most growth and the most healing. And it allows, when we can embrace all of who we are, when we can look at all the ew, yucky, ugly kind of parts that we perhaps have spent a long, long time pushing aside and not wanting to acknowledge about ourselves. I think when we can embrace all of ourselves as who we are, then we really do get to live the life we want to live. We don't have to be held back by, I'm not deserving of, somebody might find out, if you really knew who I was. I've kind of changed from that sense of, if you really knew who I was, you wouldn't like me, to like, if you really get to know me, I'm actually pretty nice. Which I never used to be able to say at all. And even just saying it now, I'm kind of like, you're really saying this on this thing, but yeah.
Yeah. But actually, there's a little segue there too, because as clinicians, it is such a privilege and a powerful kind of process to be able to work with the dark side for and with our clients, and sometimes with ourselves, and at the very same time, that's what makes it, a challenging sort of process and kind of part of one's life journey as a clinician. And so I really get the self-care piece that you've started to kind of focus in on there. How can you help or work with other clinicians, other practitioners who are doing this important and challenging sort of work? So tell us a bit about that. What's the new kind of direction there that you're heading off in with self-care for clinicians and practitioners?
Well, it had started, I'd had this idea pre-COVID of starting a group for helping professionals that could come together. There's some amazing groups on Facebook and that help us navigate Medicare and help us, navigate challenging questions we might have about our clinical work and all that sort of stuff. But what I felt was lacking was a space where we as helping professionals could actually focus on us and not be worrying about the clients and not be thinking about Medicare or the practicalities of running businesses and things like that, but actually focusing on us and what it means to be a human in a therapist chair. So I'd had this idea of a group, and because of some of my kind of not wanting to be kind of out there and visible and still some of that stuff around, is this just what I would find interesting, or is this something I think other people would find interesting? So still some of that self-doubt. I just didn't do anything about it. Plus I was busy, so I didn't get around to it. And then COVID hit. And I just thought, do you know what? This is the time to do this. Like, this is absolutely needed, because all I kept hearing was, out in community was, oh, you're struggling. Oh, just go and see a psychologist. Just go and see a psychologist. And I kept thinking, hang on a minute. We're psychologists and we're living in a global pandemic and we're finding this really hard and we're scared of getting COVID and we're separated from our families and all the same things that are happening for clients are happening for us. So I kind of put a bit of a thing out on social media and said, this is what I'm doing. Is anybody interested? And it was just like, boom. So many people got in touch. I'd love to be a part of this. So I started a weekly group, and we have a Facebook page and we meet online once a week, which used to be just on a Friday morning, but I've got people from overseas that have joined as well. So now we do a Wednesday evening and then the following week, Friday morning, and alternate that way. And it's been more than I could have hoped for, actually. It's a really beautiful, compassionate, caring group of people. And we come together and we talk about how we've been going, what are our blocks to self-care, what have been some of the things we've done for self-care, because we share those because they could be helpful for other people. We talk about all sorts of things, but in relation to ourselves and the role that we're in and all the things we have to juggle as human beings that choose to be in helping professionals, in a helping profession. So it's been really, really lovely. And then there's a couple of things that I do in the group. I do an accountability post on a Monday, and if people have got intentions for self-care, then they post them in the group and I check in with them at the end of the week to see how they've gone. And then we do a meditations with Mother Nature, which is just a post where if people are out and about and they see something beautiful in their water or in the forests or wherever, they post the picture in the group, so people get an opportunity to just kind of meditate on that for a little bit during their busy day. So it's been really, really fantastic. I've also been working on some resources that I'll be promoting soon. And I am also starting a podcast soon, which I'm very excited about. As you know, it takes a fair bit to get that up and off the ground. So I'm still in the process of doing that. That will be called Welcome to Self, Caring for the Human in the Therapist Chair. So again, I will be promoting that soon. And that's aimed at helping professionals, but also just aimed at humans, really. And I'm really hoping that that will be somewhere where people can just come and check in and have a bit of soothing and maybe pick up some tips. And I'll do some interviews with people as well, but also sometimes just me kind of talking and kind of keeping it brief so that it's not adding to the burden of what people have got on during their week. So that's some of the stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've got a head full of ideas.
Yeah. Oh, Hayley, I can't wait. I think it's so exciting, and I'm sort of waiting with bated breath, especially for the podcast, and to see, you know, kind of how you go with all that, and also, you know, the resources. I love the phrase "welcome to self." I know that's one of the ones that came. It sort of like came to you, I think, didn't it? You know, it was sort of as a early on, actually, this notion of welcome to self. That's really, and then you've kind of riffed off that in some ways.
Yeah, that was at a workshop I did with Dennis Tersch in Byron Bay. And yeah, you go to these trainings and they say, do you want to do a role play or a real play? And I was quite at the height of my chronic illness, kind of really struggling with that at the time. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take that as my example to work on for my personal practice during this workshop. And Dennis asked if anyone wanted to do a real play and do some chair work, because who doesn't love that?
Yeah.
So I volunteered, which had been actually in a lot of the trainings. I'd started, even back in uni, I'd started putting my hand up and being brave. It would made me want to be sick sometimes, but that's okay. Because I knew I would get a lot out of it. So I did this, and we did chair work with I think it was with my chronic illness, my critical self, and ultimately my compassionate self. And I had shocked myself about how harsh I was towards myself for having this chronic illness, which of course was not my fault. But the critic just absolutely went to town on me. And then, to cut a long story short, when I was in my compassionate self, I just had this really deep sense of connecting with my true self for the first time in my life. And the words just came out of my mouth, and I was just like, oh, welcome to self. And it gives me a bit goosebumpy actually talking about it.
Me too.
And when Dennis was sort of debriefing with everyone after and asking for feedback, a woman said to him, so Dennis, Hayley used this term, welcome to self. What is that? What's that concept? And Dennis just kind of looked at me and I looked at him, and he just said to the woman, actually, that's just Hayley's. So I just explained that of what my experience had been. And then, I kind of held on to it and have used it now as a part of my branding and part of the work that I do, because it is so meaningful to me.
Oh, and such I mean, it is the heart of the reminder that you're sort of offering, isn't it? Is we're especially with clinicians and practitioners, we're all very good at welcome to the other, I suppose. And it's kind of like welcome to self. So one of my curiosities with the work that you might do with practitioners and the weekly group and so on, are there certain ways that you more specifically bring CFT into that? Are there kind of CFT practices, or do you sort of work even with sort of formulating things and so on, or is it more a kind of a general discussion? Where might CFT come into some of that work with self-care?
Well, I think CFT has become part of me. I don't think I do anything in my life now that's not got compassion focus in it. I think that's the beautiful thing about CFT, is it's not just something we learn, to teach other people
Mm.
or do to other people. It's something we really learn and embody, and it becomes part of the process in all the things that we do, or can, if you allow it to. So with the group, we will sort of, as we're talking, it tends to be a general discussion. There's no sort of set agenda at this stage with what we talk about, although there does seem to be a theme. And it's interesting because even when people come in at different times during the meeting, I always say to them, because people will apologize for being late, and I say, well, there is no late in this group. You're either here or you're not here. And if you can come for 10 minutes in the middle, or you can come for 5 minutes at the beginning, or you can come for 20 minutes at the end, then just turn up. Yeah, so you're either here or you're not here. There is no late. So if people come in at different times in the meeting, even though there's been a theme that seems to have been established, they almost come in and that's what they kind of really wanted to talk about. It's quite bizarre and really lovely. So there's no general sort of agenda, but we will talk about the 3 circles, and we talk a lot about threat-based drive, because I think as clinicians, we can get very much caught up in threat-based drive, whether that's in session with our clients. You know, we might get triggered, and if we're not aware of what that trigger is, the threat system gets activated, and we go into like, how can I be a good clinician? What can I tell them next? What can I do? Or after the session, we can get caught in that. And again, if we're not recognizing that's what's happening, we can be jumping online, buying the next best book and booking into trainings or that sort of thing. You know, if I do enough, if I learn enough, if I read enough, then I can settle down and feel better about myself. So we talk about those. I also do, I've got to mention that I also do a guided meditation at the end of every session. And a lot of those will have some connection to compassionate self. Not always, they're not always specifically kind of compassionate self meditations, but the compassion theme flows through all of it. I don't know how in my life I couldn't do that now. That's part of my professional life. It's part of my personal life. It's part of my inner life. Yeah.
The threat-based drive idea does seem very important for practitioners. And myself included, but lots of people that I've known over the years, there's a sort of for me, I've always noticed a sort of a defectiveness, approval seeking, self-sacrificing, if we're talking in those sort of terms, there's sort of like a combination there that I think probably is this sort of threat-based drive, insecure striving thing.
Yeah.
Or even that notion of clinician shame. What can you just talk a bit more about some of those pieces with clinicians and how that might kind of work for us?
Look, I think that can come from lots of places. I think one of the really important things is understanding our own experiences, understanding our own beliefs, and the sort of narrative that we tell ourselves. Because then when we are dealing with particular client issues or a client responds to us in a certain way, it can trigger us in different ways. One thing a client might say to you might not impact you in a negative way, whereas if they said it to me, I might notice that my threat system gets quite activated and vice versa. So I think when we can be aware of our own histories and understanding ourselves as humans with tricky minds, as we all are, then we can be more aware of that in the moment when it happens. And I think the importance of that is, and I don't get this right every time. I'm not saying that I'm some perfect, hey, I learned CFT and I embodied it and now I'm perfect. Not at all. I have little reminders in my office. Like I have the 3 circles, a beautiful painting I had done of the 3 circles, and I have 3 little hearts in the 3 circles colours that a friend bought me, that are my reminders to keep a check on myself, because it's so easy to get triggered. And of course, when we're in our threat system, we don't have a calm, open mind. We have a narrow focus. But if we can be there for ourselves. We can remind ourselves to get more grounded, perhaps activate our soothing rhythm breathing, so that we can be more grounded for ourselves, but also more present for our clients. And then the stuff that we're dealing with, we can kind of hold gently to the side and deal with later. Some of the things that can happen, though, is we can notice it. Okay, this is my own stuff. I'll put it to the side and deal with it later. But then when later comes, we just rush around doing the things we need to do, doing GP notes, writing letters, making phone calls, responding to emails. Oh, next client's coming, quick, get back in the room, sit in the chair. And we forget that there's actually a part of us that is suffering. There's a part of us that actually needs compassion and soothing and care. Because there can be lots of micro moments like that throughout the day. And if we never tend to that, then there's parts of ourselves that continue to feel neglected. And depending on your own experience and your own history, that could be reinforcing some really painful stories for you.
Yes, I think that's a really, I'll sort of ponder that, this notion of neglectful of ourselves almost. Yes, that it sort of adds up across the day, because something might occur or rise up and we just sort of neglect ourselves in that moment, and then we charge on and whatever, and then another thing happens and we kind of neglect ourselves, and all of these little things might be quite unique to us, but depending, as you say, on our own historical influences, I guess, and being really well aware of the history, and then noticing of the moments, trying to, in that moment, not neglect ourselves as well.
Yeah. And I think some of the other stuff as well, I heard my ping on my mail and it's taken my mind away. See, this is what the tricky mind does, isn't it?
That's an example.
This is exactly what the tricky mind does. It's like, I closed all my notifications so it wouldn't ping. And now I'm having this little bit of a response of like, oh no, it pinged. Somehow there's a little part of me that feels bad about that. And I could spin into this spiral of like, oh no, Stan's gonna say you didn't turn off your thing, and this is terrible, and it's ruined the podcast, or I can just be like, bloody technology, hey?
Yeah.
This stuff happens, and it takes your train.
Stan is much nicer than that, actually, too.
Yes, that wasn't a reflection on how you would be. But
no,
I'd had this thought as well. I'd had this thought about, a therapist shame. I think one of the things that comes across a lot as well is I talk to numerous people who are thoughtful and considered clinicians. They seek supervision, they do training, they work hard at their profession, and we have this professional body. And I think there can be this underlying sense of you can get in trouble. And it does seem to have this kind of underlying current through the profession that somehow we have to be perfect or we could get in trouble with APRA. And I think it's really quite sad, because I think it brings up some blocks to people speaking out when they're struggling. I think there's a huge stigma for helping professionals, not just psychologists, but all helping professionals, if they're dealing with mental health issues. And let's face it, mental health does not discriminate based on job description. If they're struggling with, life tragedies or struggles, which again, let's face it, we all have, we're all human. So I think it can put up some barriers within the profession and other helping professions that we don't feel like we can seek support, that we should know how to do all the things because we've got skills. I've recently just started a series on social media called Shift the Narrative that kind of talks to some of this stuff, because I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we are human first. We chose, and that was Siri. You see, even Siri's tuning into this podcast.
This is really interesting.
We're just having like a big technology thing going on.
But you're saying really important stuff. So yes, keep going.
Yeah. So I think, we absolutely have to acknowledge that we're human beings. We are not psychologists. We are not helping professionals. We are human beings who choose a work role that happens to be in a helping profession. And we have lives that are far more complex than the job that we do. And we also have to acknowledge that we actually do a job that is at times very challenging and demanding, particularly at the moment when demand is high. This pandemic has really highlighted that we need broader services. We can't just rely on private practitioners to be meeting all the needs in the community. And I think a lot of practitioners get quite caught up in, but I have to see people because there's no one else. And it can't be our responsibility to solve a problem that needs to be addressed by the government.
It's sort of, well, it's kind of in a way sad to think, but therapists and other health practitioners, there's a sort of a constant subtle threat in a way in the system, and we in some ways we understand it. We know that we have to be sort of professional and ethical and whatever, but yes, there is this sort of constant threat and this sense of will I get in trouble, and then we find it hard to speak about struggles that we have, because then it's the next thing, like I'll be seen as an impaired practitioner then, and so then that's getting in more trouble. And it's interesting, because I sometimes notice, even on some of the Facebook groups where people are talking about Medicare or things like that, that even there it can feel feisty. You can sometimes feel like I'm not sure I should say that, because someone might catch me in it being wrong or something like that. And it suddenly makes me sort of realize that we're often therefore in a kind of a safety mode rather than in a safeness kind of mode. We're in this sense of just trying to sort of seek safety in amongst these various subtle and sometimes not so subtle threats. And so what do we do in safety mode? Well, we defend and we hide away a bit, or that sort of thing. And you mentioned right at the start that for you with Kelly Wilson and so on, that was almost the key, wasn't it? Was a sense of safeness. And that's what you're trying to create now as well with your weekly groups and even with the podcast. It's all woven with creating safeness for practitioners and therapists and so on to be able to kind of touch on and explore all of this stuff.
It's tricky.
It's tricky. Yes. One of the things that I've absolutely embodied with CFT is we have tricky brains. I can't tell you how often I say that.
But it's true, isn't it? I mean, it's so
absolutely true.
It can grab us and whip us away so very quickly. And I think the more we can get practiced in the things that are helpful in grounding us and being compassionate towards ourselves, the more we can kind of hold ourselves whilst our tricky mind's trying to whip us away.
Because you did mention as well the notion of blocks to self-care, and no doubt, yes, those are part of it too. The fears, blocks, and resistances to, I guess, self-compassion or receiving compassion from others. All of that, I guess, comes into it, and you sort of discuss that, I guess, in the group too.
Definitely. The narratives that we hold around whether we should take time for ourselves or, say to somebody, what would it be like to prioritize yourself? And sometimes the response, that's even like,
Yeah.
because
It's
this
sort
is
of,
not necessarily how we're taught. And not to say men don't experience this, but particularly for women, the thought of putting yourself first and not thinking about taking care of everybody else first is quite alien. So trying to shift that and open up some gentle questions and prompts, and some of the meditations I do is will raise some of those questions and do some imagining around those sort of things, and then sitting with the feelings that show up, and then perhaps bringing compassion to that part of ourselves that maybe is showing up in that moment. I mean, even as I'm talking to you about it, I just love this work. I just love it.
Yeah,
It's
amazing.
And I
Amazing
think
stuff.
whilst I don't promote self-care for human beings as a way of, then you can be a better clinician, that's not my main priority of the focus. But I do believe that if you can bring compassion into your life and into your practices, then it can make you, or it can help you become more present in your role as a clinician. I think it can enhance your work as a clinician, and it can enhance the life that you're living, because you get to make choices from a different place. You're not making choices from threat.
Which actually, I'm guessing, sort of probably applies to the accountant or flight attendant that I mentioned earlier as well. It's the humanness that really you're tapping into there. And I think sometimes the practitioners just forget that bit and feel this weight of responsibility and obligation to others.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's sort of, that you mentioned that we each have our own histories, and so we each have our own kind of triggers or that sort of thing. And I suppose we each have our own self-care sort of committed actions as well, that different things would be, sort of more or less kind of resonant to different people.
Definitely. I don't think you can do a prescription for self-care. I can't say, okay, this is the self-care model that is going to work for human beings. It's not prescriptive like that. It is unique. Whilst we are very, very similar, we are also very different. And what works for somebody isn't going to work for somebody else. And I think it really is, I guess my aim is to open up the thinking and the opportunities to reflect on what would your self-care look like. And some of that will be external resources, and some of that is, bubble baths and whatever you like to do. I don't know if you like bubble baths, but I do. Some of it might be going for a massage or exercising. It could be that external things. And some of it's the internal resources that we draw upon. And it's the time of stillness. And I think a really big one, certainly for me, is changing the relationship that we have with ourselves. So I think it's about finding what works for you. But to do that, you have to give yourself time and space to reflect.
She says with a smile, knowing that in some ways that's the first little challenging bit, isn't it?
Yeah, it can
Giving
be.
yourself time and space.
Yeah. But that time, Stan, could be 1 minute in your day. Absolutely. That time could be, as my client leaves today, I'm just going to sit and take 3 breaths. And then I'm going to notice how that feels compared to when the last client left and I just raced straight to my computer to do notes. It doesn't have to be, okay, I need to take a week off and think about how I'm going to plan my self-care. It can be tiny little micro moments through the day, which might then lead to, actually, I like reflecting on that. That was quite helpful. Maybe I'm going to take half an hour. Maybe I'm going to take half a day next week. Maybe I'm actually going to take some time off.
Yeah, starting small is a nice way in, because it often does kind of leave you wanting more almost, or something like that, or feeling like more would be good. Well, you've had an incredible and rather inspiring journey. There's a kind of a story arc there that's really been quite amazing, and both drawing from others and the inspiration of others, but really working some of this stuff out yourself. Not perfect, of course, and that, all of that sort of thing, but really now starting to kind of even just kind of offer things to others, or I would like to say kind of inspire others. You might not, I'm not sure, but that really feels like what it is to me, that it's a chance now to sort of pass this on and spread the word. One of the things that I was going to ask you and ask everybody is for 3 tips, whether you are able to, in amongst all of the stuff that we've been talking about, what might be 3 tips, maybe for practitioners and therapists, but 3 tips for people who are making their own way on their compassionate journey.
So what I always say to clients, supervisees, people that I talk to, here are my 3 tips. Practice, practice, practice. And then joking aside, but actually I'm not joking. You do need to practice,
It's
practice.
True.
And then when you've practiced, remember to practice some more. But I think starting small is really important. I think going gently with ourselves and remembering that we are humans with tricky brains, and change is hard. Change is hard for everybody, because if it wasn't, we would all be living our ideal lives. And the other one, from a really practical point of view, like most of us have smartphones, and I would say pop some reminders in your phone. Have a little alarm that's labeled that reminds you to take some breaths or to reflect on something. Or stick Post-it notes around your house. I did that when I was studying. I had a thing by my kettle which said, keep going, studying is fun, you will succeed. Or keep smiling, studying is fun, you will succeed. The studying is fun bit was just to trick my mind that studying was really fun. Also, I do have a resource coming out soon, which hopefully will help people as well. So once that's available, I'm in the process of having a new website done, which I'm really excited about. So that will make things easier to disseminate resources and the such like.
I'll definitely put links to sort of your website when it arrives, and I think people will be very keen to see what you've got to offer there. If people are wanting to sort of engage with you or your work, or what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
So you can email me at Hayley, Hayley, at drhayleydquinn.com. Okay. Or I'm on Instagram under Dr. Hayley D Quinn, and I'm on Facebook under Dr. Hayley D Quinn. And I've got a landing page for my website now, but not the full website, and that's www.drhayleydquinn.com.
Okay. Well, Hayley, that's I've really appreciated that. I appreciate your sort of warmth and loveliness, but also just your willingness to be so open and honest about your own journey and really the triumphs there. So yes, thank you very much for being on Compassion in a T-shirt in session.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great.